The anguish that is today tormenting the souls of the West derives from the fact that during the past century, and perhaps for the first time in history, man reached the point of believing himself secure. And this security is the net result of progressivism. The progressivist idea consists in affirming not only that humanity, an abstract, irresponsible, non existent entity invented at the time, progresses, which is certain, but also that it progresses of necessity. This idea anesthetized the European and the American to that basic feeling of risk, which is the substance of man. Because if humanity inevitably progresses, this means that we can abandon all watchfulness, stop worrying, throw off all responsibility, or, as we say in Spain, snore away, and let humanity bear us inevitably to perfection and delight. Human history, thus, loses all the bone and sinew of drama and is reduced to a peaceful tourist trip, organized by some transcendent kooks. Traveling thus securely towards its fulfillment, the civilization in which we are embarked would be like the Phoenician ship in Homer, which sailed straight to port without a pilot. This security is what we are paying for today. Before I begin debunking evolution, I must state that I am not a creationist, and I have to state this because it appears like most people think in a very polarized manner, in a very black and white manner, where if you're not with me, then you're against me. If you're not on my side, then you must be on their side. To most people, there is no middle ground. There is no neutral ground. Both creationist and evolutionist fail at the first rule of philosophy. They fail at the first rule of wisdom. They believe that they know what they do not know. They both arrogantly and egotistically just assert theories that make them feel like they know what they do not know. They both remind me of shipwrecked men who in their terror and in their utter insecurity grab a hold of whatever floating objects they can, hoping that this object will lead to their salvation. With that out of the way, I am now going to debunk evolution, and after I debunk evolution, I am going to relate it to that opening quote. We're going to start off by seeking to understand the theory of evolution, because as Sun Tzu said, if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you can face 100 battles and never know defeat. So let's take on the effort of becoming familiar with evolution. Let's start off with one of the most commonly taught proofs of evolution, Darwin's finches. Here's a little graph that explains Darwin's finches. So at the very bottom of the graph, you'll see that there is this common ancestor from South American mainland. And then you will see that somehow, and we'll figure out how, somehow this common ancestor underwent 3 separate mutations. Okay, you can see that it branches off, or if you want to say 2 mutations, and then halfway down the line it underwent a third one. We should just put 3 separate mutations. They only have it here because it makes it look a little bit more appealing to the eye. Tricks your brain a little bit easier. So this common ancestor underwent 3 separate mutations. One went off to the warbler finches, the other went off into the tree finches, and the other one went off into the ground finches. The warbler finches broke off into 2 mutations, which aren't really mutations. I mean, a color change isn't too big of a mutation. That is a mutation that I can see happening. There are people with different colored skin and different colored hair, so that's not like it mutating into different subspecies. So the warbler finch broke off into the green warbler finch and the gray warbler finch. They're almost identical in appearance. The only difference is their color. The tree finches, however, broke off into bud eaters and insect eaters. And as you can see, they have very distinctive beaks. They're very different. So moving on over to the ground finches. The ground finches broke off into 3 separate subspecies. They broke off into seed eaters, and they broke off into cactus flower eaters. And one was it's kind of in between both. It's just sharp-beaked ground finch. So you can see that there is quite a variety here. Now the important thing to know is why these finches changed the way that they changed. Why this common ancestor underwent all of these different mutations. And let's see what they say. According to Wikipedia, under Darwin's finches, if you type into Google, why are Darwin's finches different, you'll come up with this answer. It says, due to the absence of other species of birds, the finches adapted to new niches. And, both of those things there, the absence of other species of birds and them adapting to new niches, doesn't really say much. However, the next sentence does say enough. So, the finches' beaks and bodies changed, allowing them to eat certain types of foods, such as nuts, fruits, and insects. See, here it doesn't really say why their bodies change. It seems like it's saying that their bodies changed to allow them to eat certain types of foods, such as nuts, fruits, and insects. So this gives the appearance that the theory is that these finches went to a different island, and on those islands, there was a different variety of food. And thus, the beaks of the birds had to adapt or had to mutate in order to eat those foods. So let's just keep that in mind. Here's another image that pretty much sums it up. This shows the large ground finch, and it shows that they're seed eaters, and it shows that it has that big strong beak for eating those seeds. And then this one shows a cactus ground finch. It shows the cactus fruits and flowers. I guess it has that more pointed beak, kind of sharp, still pretty dense looking. And that's, I guess, get through the cactus spikes. Then we have a vegetarian finch, which eats buds. I guess it has that beak that looks like it's perfectly adapted to eating buds. And then we have the woodpecker finch. And as you can see, the woodpecker finch, it has a very pointed beak. And it even uses tools to go and fish out insects that are hiding inside of wood. So this kind of sums up the theory that their beaks evolved so that they can utilize the food in their environment. Let's remember that, okay? I'm not going to address that just yet. We're going to come around, we're going to address that after we look at a couple other animals that supposedly evolved. So the next animal that we're going to look at, another very common proof of evolution, is the whale. So the whale, as you can see in this picture, is theorized to have been a land animal. As you can see, the top left is what the whale originally was. It was this carnivorous land animal. And the theory goes, as you can see in this graph that shows the whale's evolution, on this picture you see the carnivorous looking land animal. And the idea is that this carnivorous land animal spent a lot of time in the water. Spent a lot of time hunting fish in the water, getting the fish and stuff. And let's just keep in mind, everyone, that life started in the ocean. So this land animal, this land carnivore, this land predator, would have had to start as a fish, then it would have made it onto the land, then mutate into a mammal, and then after mutating into a mammal, it would then go back into the water as a water mammal. Let's not laugh at their theory just yet. They say, well, this is over a long, long period of time. Remember, this is hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Let's keep that in mind too, okay? So anyway, getting back to this proof of evolution, the whale. So it spent time in the water, and then it spent more time in the water, and then it spent even more time in the water, and then it just started to adapt for its environment. These genes are just so self-aware that they know exactly how best to mutate, because that's what they're doing. They're mutating. They're not adapting. Okay, remember, evolution is mutation, and we're gonna see that in a second. So this is the theory of the whale. Okay, and keep in mind the theory of the whale, like this same animal, it also became a dolphin. It breaks off if you look at other charts of it. So anyway, that's that theory. But now, as I was saying, evolution is based off of mutation. Okay, people, the scientific community will say, oh no, well, there's adaptive evolution and then there's evolution. They're just trying to split hairs to try to make it make sense. Okay, so now, if you type in understanding evolution, or if you go to look and understand evolution, this little summary that I have on the screen now comes from us from Berkeley. Okay, berkeley.edu. So don't try to tell me, oh, Wikipedia is not a good source. I got you a nice edu source, nice education source from a university. So this is understanding evolution, and it says DNA and mutations. Mutations are random. Mutations can be beneficial, neutral, or harmful for the organism. But mutations do not try to supply what the organism needs. Factors in the environment may influence the rate of mutation, but are not generally thought to influence the direction of mutation. There you go, people. This is actually truly understanding evolution. See, and as far as I'm aware, I don't know of many mutations that are beneficial. I mean, maybe amongst the insect world, they'll have a mutation that makes them like resistant to like a certain poison. But as far as I can tell, I've never seen a mutation that's actually been beneficial. Okay, I've never seen a mutation in a human being or in other animals that has been beneficial. I've seen animals come out with 2 heads, clubbed feet, multiple legs. All of these mutations that I've seen, none of them have been beneficial. So now we have to go back. If mutations are random, then everything that was said about the finches is bullshit. Okay? As it says here, mutations do not try to supply what the organism needs. These animals, this finch, landed on an island or got stranded on an island. Let's say a storm blew it on this island. Okay? I mean, the finch can fly. I don't understand why it would fly to an island where it can't survive. So anyway, let's say a storm blew this finch on an island, or a bunch of these finches on an island, because it can't just blow one finch. They don't produce asexually. It needs to go there with other finches that it can mate with. These finches were blown onto an island, or somehow carried to an island somehow, and they got there, and their beak was not suited for eating the food on that island. They would likely die. Of course, one will say, oh, well, there would be some kinds of food there that they could eat, and then they'll survive. But the point is that their beaks would not mutate. They would not adapt to just being able to eat the stuff on the island, because that's not how mutations work. So I understand evolution, but some people will say I don't understand evolution, and they'll try to spin it to say that, oh, there's different kinds of evolution, there's adaptive evolution. No, there isn't, okay? Evolution is random mutations, okay? These random mutations, as it says clearly right here in berkeley.edu, these random mutations do not try to supply what the organism needs. Okay, so let's move on. So some people will say that, oh, well, guess what? There's signs of evolution in people, and they'll cite this high altitude adaptation in humans. This high altitude adaptation in humans, which is being hailed as a proof of evolution in human beings. High altitude adaptation in humans is them talking about the human's lungs. You know, they say, oh, well, humans who live up in mountains, their lungs have evolved to take in more oxygen, and like, you know, they'll say that their vessels, their blood vessels, like have changed, and they'll say all of this stuff. Even right here, high altitude adaptation in humans, in the Wikipedia, it says, high-altitude adaptation in humans is an instance of evolutionary modification in certain human populations, including those of Tibet in Asia, the Andes of the Americas, and Ethiopia in Africa, who have acquired the ability to survive at extremely high altitudes. Yeah, they just acquired it. Anyway, so this adaptation means irreversible long-term physiological responses to high-altitude environments associated with heritable behavioral and genetic changes. So they say that these changes are genetic. I'm going to prove that they're not in a second. But anyway, let's go down. And it says, while the rest of the human population would suffer serious health consequences, the indigenous inhabitants of these regions thrive well in the highest parts of the world. These people have undergone extensive physiological and genetic changes, particularly in the regulatory systems of oxygen respiration and blood circulation, when compared to the general lowland population. And notice how they say the general lowland population, which means not the entire lowland population. You have to be watchful of the words that they use, because they are sophist of the highest order. The special adaptation is now recognized as an example of natural selection in action. The adaptation account of the Tibetans has become the fastest case of human evolution in the scientific record, as it is estimated to have occurred in less than 3,000 years. But I'm now going to prove that this high-altitude adaptation in humans is all just bullshit. It's just fake news. It's just spinning of the truths. And I'm going to prove this through a couple of ways. I'm going to start off by proving that this is just totally fake news and propaganda in action by citing this paper entitled Genetic Approaches to Understanding Human Adaptation to Altitude in the Andes. And this paper was put together by the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine and Department of Zoology at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada. and it was accepted July 2nd, 2001. This is a scholarly paper, okay? So you guys can look this up yourself. It's not a bad source. It's a completely credited source, okay? So in the summary, what I want to highlight is right here. A complex trait is influenced by multiple genetic and environmental factors, and in humans, it is inherently very difficult to determine what proportion of the trait is dictated by an individual's genetic heritage and what proportion develops in response to the environment in which the person is born and raised. So in other words, they can't really determine which is which, but, they're going to say that it's genetic, just because it helps push this theory of evolution. So now the next thing that I'm going to bring up that proves that no, it's just the person's nurture, it's just like the person, how they're being raised. And the evidence that I'm going to use for this is altitude training. So altitude training, if you don't know, altitude training is the practice by some endurance athletes of training for several weeks at high altitude, preferably over 2,400 meters, 8,000 feet, above sea level, though more commonly at intermediate altitudes due to the shortage of suitable high-altitude locations. So these high-altitude trainers, they don't train for very long. They only do it for several weeks. So they see improvements, or they see signs of their body adapting after several weeks. Okay, so of course, these populations that they claim are evolving in these high altitudes, they were born there, okay? So if they were born there, they spent their life there, of course their body is going to be able to adapt. But I'm sure that if those people in those high altitudes gave birth to a child in a low altitude region and they kept that child in a low altitude region, that child would not have the same physiology as its parents, because its body would then adapt to that low altitude region. And this is not evolution in action, because evolution occurs at a genetic level. This is just occurring at a cellular level, and it's occurring on a physiological level, but it's not occurring at a genetic level. It's not changing that person's genetics, where they're then going to pass on that genetic information to their offspring. Okay, and it's very simple to test this by doing exactly what I said. Have some of these high altitude people, have some of these people who live up in the mountains, who have this physiological adaptation, and have them have a child in a low altitude region and keep that child there. And I guarantee you, that child, as I've already said, is not going to have the same physiological characteristics. And I mean, these high altitude runners prove that, hey, your body can adapt to these environments relatively quickly. I mean, they're only training there for several weeks, and I'm sure they're not just doing it just to do it. I'm sure that they do it for those several weeks because they see improvements, or they see a difference after those several weeks. So now, moving back on to this whole idea of evolution, the whole 100 million years of adaptation will do this. You spend hundreds of millions of years adapting. This isn't the case, okay? And the reason why I say this isn't the case is because there are animals that have been around for hundreds of millions of years without a single sign of evolution, such as the crocodile. Crocodiles have been around for 200 million years. And here's what it says about crocodiles. Crocodiles are the ultimate survivors. Having arisen some 200 million years ago, they have outlived dinosaurs by some 65 million years. Even humans, the most fearsome predators ever to stalk the earth, have failed to force into extinction any of the 23 species of crocodilians. So here, when they say crocodiles are the ultimate survivors, they should be saying, crocodiles are the ultimate resistors of evolution. That's what they really should be saying. I mean, and since the crocodiles have been around for over 200 million years, I'm sure that we can bet that their eating habits had changed over the course of that history, because the environment has changed many times over the last 200 million years. There's been at least one extinction level event since then, and there's been several ice ages since then. So I'm sure that their eating habits, as well as their environment, have changed over that long period of time. So how come no species of crocodiles didn't mutate like the whales did? How come they didn't lose their legs? How come they didn't trade in their legs for fins? Okay, see, this is another proof against evolution. There shouldn't be animals like this that are just totally immune to mutations. These mutations are supposed to happen at random. Why do they appear to be totally immune? And crocodiles aren't even the greatest one. Actually, there's another species out there who have been around twice as long as crocodiles and have shown no signs of evolution, have shown zero signs of random mutations occurring to them. And actually, the hilarious thing is that this species was believed to be a transitional species. They were believed to have been extinct. They were believed to have moved on. They evolved. They adapted. They had a random mutation that actually turned them into one of the first land animals. This was according to evolution. They actually believed that this species then adapted into another species, which then made its way onto land. Okay, and this species is the coelacanth. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and if I'm not, it doesn't matter if I'm pronouncing it correctly or not. So this species, the coelacanth, as you can see in its Wikipedia, the coelacanth, which is related to lungfishes and tetrapods, was believed to have been extinct since the end of the Cretaceous period. More closely related to tetrapods than to the ray-finned fish, coelacanths were considered transitional species between fish and tetrapods were like one of the first fishes to walk on land. Okay, tetrapods eventually became actual quadrupeds. So guess what? They rediscovered this species after they thought that, oh, it must have been extinct and gone. And guess how long this species has been around for? Over 400 million years. Okay, so this thing has been around for 400 million years. I'm sure its environment has changed a whole bunch of times. Okay, don't say that, oh, well, it's been around for 400 million years, but its environment has never changed. No, I'm sure that, it's gone through several extinction events. Okay, and extinction events supposedly like drastically changed the environment, which caused a whole bunch of animals to go extinct. So this thing has gone through several different Earth changes. Okay, the Earth was supposedly very different 400 million years ago. So why has this species not evolved? What is it, just immune to random mutations? What, are some animals' genetics more prone to random mutations than others? This doesn't make any sense. Okay, now I'm going to give another proof. Okay, and by the way, the hippopotamus is another one. Been around for 55 million years. Okay, at least 55 million years. How come the hippopotamus didn't evolve like the whale? It's heavy as shit. It's cumbersome. Its weight is actually rather cumbersome. How come it didn't evolve to just get fins? It spends a lot of time in the water. So anyway, another thing that totally debunks this evolution. We're going to go for another proof of evolution now. And by the way, actually, you know what? I'm going to just talk about something real quick. I'm going to talk about humans being in water. So there's many different populations of humans. This is going back to humans who supposedly, they say that the high altitude humans, they're adapting to the high altitude and stuff. How come humans, like island folks, there's people like I myself, one part of my family comes from Puerto Rico in the Caribbean. The island people, they spend a lot of time in the water. Okay, how come they didn't evolve like Kevin Costner in Waterworld? Huh? How come that didn't happen? Kevin Costner, he evolved. He started getting gills in his thing. He had the fin hands. He had like little webbed feet. Fin hands. What the hell is a fin hand? He had webbed feet, and I'm not sure if he had webbed hands in that movie. I forget. I haven't seen it in a while. But how come that didn't happen? And if you ask me, that movie Waterworld was like one of the biggest works of propaganda. It was indoctrinating people with two things. One, it was indoctrinating people on global warming. And, oh my god, the ice caps are going to melt and everything's going to flood. It's going to be a water world. So that was one piece of indoctrination that movie was working on. The other one was this whole BS theory of evolution. So, you really should be careful for what you allow yourself to watch. You should really be aware of what you're watching and what you're allowing to enter your brain and enter into your thoughts. I just had to throw that out there about Waterworld and humans adapting. Let me go now to my final debunking of evolution. And that's going to go into this idea that this thing, after it undergoes this random mutation, it somehow thrives. Okay, I'm going to debunk this idea of something going through a random mutation and then thriving after undergoing that random mutation, undergoing that random genetic mutation. I'm going to start off with the chicken and the egg. So if you look up, which came first, the chicken or the egg, you're going to get this. It says, so in a nutshell, or in an eggshell if you like, they're so funny. Two birds that weren't really chickens created a chicken egg, and then hence we have an answer. The egg came first and then it hatched a chicken. So the question that I have, remember, these mutations are random. Okay, so let's say if there were two chickens who happen to have an egg, and well, not two chickens, but two bird-like chickens. They happen to have an egg, okay? So now the question that I have is, how is that egg going to reproduce with anything else? I mean, these guys had the random mutation of producing an egg, but who's to say that every other bird-like animal like that before, like, the birds that gave birth to this first chicken egg, who's to say that the other birds in that category had this random mutation to produce an egg? So who's this new chicken gonna mate with? Who is it going to reproduce with? Are you gonna say that, oh well, it can reproduce with its fellow hatchlings? It's gonna mate with the other hatchlings in there. Well, we know that doesn't work because that will be inbreeding, and that inbreeding will cause not so favorable mutations. Now, if we say, well, those chickens, those new hatched chickens, they could have mated with those previous birds, those birds that had that random mutation that led to that chicken egg, and then but at that point it would create a hybrid, and hybrids, we know from mating tigers and lions and other animals and other animal hybrids, that hybrids, they produce sterile offspring. Most of their offspring are sterile. And why? And it says here, this is why ligers, mules, and other hybrid animals can't reproduce. In short, hybrid animals are infertile because they don't have viable sex cells, meaning they can't produce sperm or eggs. This is the case because the chromosomes from their different species parents don't match up. So there you go. If this newly hatched chicken tried to mate with one of those other bird things, their sex cells wouldn't have matched up. And this is the case for so many different animals. And even other animals, even like dogs, like I myself, and I'll let you guys in on a little something, I do a little bit of dog walking. There are dogs like the Labradoodle and Golden Doodle, which I happen to walk, and here's a little picture of them. They actually, the owners of these dogs, decided to breed them. And there's a little fun fact about them. They don't produce a lot of offspring, okay? They produce some of the smallest litters, and that's also why they're rather expensive. That's why these hybrids, these specialized dogs, can be rather expensive, because they produce very small litters. These two beautiful pups here, in their first litter, they had one pup, and it died. Probably died because the mother, I think she experienced a little bit too much stress. She was kind of moved back and forth before she gave birth. Or it could have just been that it died because, they're hybrids. But her second litter, she produced a whopping 2 pups. Oh my god, that's an astronomical number, 2 pups. We're gonna start a whole new species of animals with those kinds of numbers. No, we're not, of course. Sarcasm. So hybrid animals, and even animals that aren't hybrids as such, animals that are just kind of like little mixed breeds, they don't produce a lot of offsprings when they're bred together. So to me, this makes it impossible for these random mutations, for these acts of evolution, to actually flourish, because they're not going to be able to reproduce. So that's another problem that I see with evolution. It's another proof against evolution, is that, okay, when this random mutation does happen, who is that animal going to reproduce with? Who is that random mutation going to reproduce with? The animals that it came from? Well, guess what? That random mutation, which changed it up enough, should make it very difficult for it to reproduce with those things that it descended from. And this is especially the case with these finches. Okay, Darwin's finches and birds, they all mate based off of mating calls. Okay, once they have this different beak, they're going to have a very hard time mating with the animal that it came from, because they're going to have a very hard time producing the correct mating call. Okay, so it's not going to be able to mate as correctly, okay? And not just that, you can look it up yourself. These animals randomly mating with each other, it doesn't happen in the wild, okay? It's not a common thing in the wild. It's not like these finches are mating with finches that look differently than them all the time in the wild. So if one wants to say that, oh, well, they flourished by mating with their previous ones, well, then today we should still see them mating with their previous ones every now and then. But we don't. Okay, in the wild, this is next to unheard of. It happens maybe once in 100 years, once in 50 years, but it doesn't happen enough for us to include that into a theory of evolution, to say that, oh, well, it mated with these other ones. So anyway, those are all my proofs against evolution. I'm now going to connect this theory of evolution with the quote that I opened this video off with. And I'm going to say that this theory of evolution came out of this progressivist ideal that was occurring around that same time. This idea that everything naturally progresses forward. And I believe that this is one of two negative things about evolution. Is it makes us believe that we just naturally progress, that we naturally evolve, that we naturally progress towards a better self. Okay, that's one awful thing about the theory of evolution. That's one terrible thing that the theory of evolution does. Another reason why I think evolution came about is because right around this time, actually, well, just before this time period, right around the time that the Declaration of Independence was signed, and just before that, the Puritans and these Catholic church reformers, they were going really hardcore on creating philosophies around God. And there were, especially like Calvinists and Puritans, they were really going into the fact that all of these churches and all of these governments were actually violating our spirituality. They were actually all violating God. And they're basically saying that the only thing that we can prove about God, the only thing that we can prove that God wants, is for us to have free will. And if you don't believe in God, we can at least say that this is a natural law, that human beings have free will and that most other animals don't. Most other animals are bound by instincts. Human beings do not have instincts. And I've argued people up and down with this, that human beings don't have instincts, and I can do it in another video if you guys want. We don't have instincts. We have reflexes, we have learned behavior, but we don't have instincts. Some people say, oh, we have paternal instincts. There's a maternal instinct. Mothers have an instinct to take care of their young. But this is false, because if mothers had an instinct to take care of their young, then there would be not a single case of mothers abandoning their babies. And it happens all the time. Okay, an instinct is a born-in drive that one cannot fight against, that one cannot go against, okay? The animals that have migration instincts, it's not like they can just say, oh yeah, I'm not going to migrate. No, it's an instinct. It is a born-in drive. Human beings do not have this, and this is why human beings have free will. But anyway, I digress. My point was, around this time, there was a whole philosophical movement around spirituality and God, and the fact that the church and governments were violating our free will, and they themselves were acting as false gods by trying to tell us what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. And by all means, I'm not trying to preach some kind of nihilistic immoralism. Okay, I mean, people should be able to learn the difference between right and wrong. But the fact is that the church telling people that, oh, God wants you to do this and not do that, violates our free will. The church cannot possibly know this. The church is not actually in communication with God, nor do they have a God like at their church. It's not like God, goes down to church and tells them, oh yeah, you can do tell people to do this and tell people not to do this. And this is also why the church tries so hard to make people believe that the Bible was written by God. But there's no proof of that. That's just propaganda, indoctrination. So anyway, my point that I was getting at, the reason why this evolution came about, is to try to debunk spirituality, to try to make it appear like we're just matter. We're just mindless matter that happened to evolve to where we are. There was no divine force behind it. There was no divine consciousness. We're just matter. Evolution is basically a materialistic philosophy. And it brings this whole disempowering aspect with it. It brings this whole idea that we're just mindless matter that needs to be managed. And that's exactly why they want evolution. They want people to believe in evolution. But it's a terribly stupid theory, as I believe I proved in this video. And I really, really suggest people to turn towards philosophy, turn towards wisdom. And remember, the first rule of philosophy, you have to know that you don't know. Okay, you have to start from scratch. Stop appealing to authority, stop appealing to popularity, and start actually thinking. Stop allowing other people to think for you. Really become a philosopher. And this is a problem with the whole truth movement, is that philosophers have been turned into truthers, and there's a total difference. By all means, keep uncovering actual truths. Keep showing that the government is behind a lot of these terrorist operations. Keep proving these false flags. Keep showing that the government funds terrorists. Keep showing all of this. keep showing that governments around the world collude with one another to keep power in their hands, just like they did in George Orwell's 1984. They have to keep a war going over there to keep people, focused on that, keep people in a state of fear. This is all just a big racket. So anyway, I'm going to leave you guys with that, and please, please, don't give up this watchfulness that is necessary for us. We need to be watchful. As human beings, we need to be ever watchful, and we need to be ever on alert. We cannot drop our guard and allow ourselves to be directed by those in charge and by this idea of humanity. Take back the reins of your life. Take back control of your life and your destiny.